Evelyn Grace Hartley was a 15-year-old from La Crosse, Wisconsin. She was a popular girl who didn't mind studying on a Friday night. On October 24th, 1953, she was babysitting for the first time at the home of the Rasmussens. At 8:30, Evelyn's father called to see how she was doing. There was no answer. Worried, he drove over to see Evelyn and found the house had been broken into. Evelyn was gone. She was never seen again. I'm Ed Denzel, and this is UnFound. I was watching Captain America Civil War for about the 20th time recently. There's the scene where Cap's team is about to take on Iron Man's at Leipzig-Halle Airport in Germany. Tony Stark makes the joke, "Wow, it's so weird how you run into people at the airport." And it's an absolute true statement. I've experienced it myself. It's like the shadow of coincidence looms large over airports, as if some supernatural force. Yet I'm sure some statistician can break the phenomenon down into percentages and graphs, and bring it all back to Earth. In the world of missing people, we often talk about coincidences. We contemplate if its shadow was hanging over this case or that one. We use phrases like wrong place, wrong time, and what are the odds that... All signs that we're trying to answer a fundamental question. Did this person disappear due to bad luck? Or was it part of a killer's plan? The answer to the question is important because each answer takes us in completely different directions. And this could be why Evelyn Hartley's case is still unsolved, 64 years later. We don't know the answer to that basic question. Nobody is sure if Evelyn was targeted, or did coincidence's shadow envelope her that night? And now a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Good's site, charlieproject.org. Evelyn was babysitting a 20-month-old girl at the home of the Rasmussens in La Crosse, Wisconsin on October 24th, 1953. The family had a regular babysitter, but she had planned to go to the homecoming football game that the Rasmussens were also attending that night. So, Evelyn was hired as a replacement. At 8:30 p.m., Evelyn was to call her parents to check in, but the call never came. Mr. Hartley tried to call the Rasmussen residence, but no one answered. Worried, he drove the short distance to their house. He found its doors locked with the lights on inside. Mr. Hartley then discovered that a basement window had been opened and its screen had been knocked out. There were footprints near the window that would match ones found inside. There was also blood on the window that was eventually determined to be Evelyn's type. After Mr. Hartley entered through the open window, he found the baby asleep in its crib, but Evelyn wasn't there. The furniture was disarranged, Evelyn's schoolbooks were scattered, and her glasses were on the floor, broken. Over the days and weeks after the disappearance, many neighbors would say they neither saw nor heard anything, despite the proximity of their homes to the Rasmussens. In addition, police found various items of clothing blocks, if not miles away from where Evelyn disappeared, that could possibly be connected to the case. Many suspects have been named and investigated since 1953, including the serial killer Ed Gein. The police even received a taped confession. Still, Evelyn's case remains unsolved. The interview for this episode is with Anthony from crimeblogger1983.blogspot.com. UnFound News. Have you checked out UnFound at triblive.com yet? You should. After a few glitches on the first day, the page runs and looks great. The pictures, the write-ups, the logo, I can't thank them enough for the work they've put into it. While I'm at it, I need to thank Podomatic.com, the hosting site for UnFound. I know Libsyn, Blueberry, and some others get more attention from true crime podcasters, but Podomatic has never let me down. I called them when the Trib and I were having some RSS feed issues last Friday. Within a minute, I had tech guy Sloan on the line, and he was very helpful. I can't thank him enough. I would recommend Podomatic to anybody wanting to start a podcast. Also in regards to the Tribune Review, we are slowly putting together how we will be working on disappearances in Western Pennsylvania, with us doing one in-depth article a month. A couple days ago, I typed out a list of the cases. There are 85. That's south of Interstate 80 and west of State College, so like 1/3 of Pennsylvania. 85 cases. Myself and the Trib certainly have our work cut out for us, but I'm really excited about getting started. Finally, less than a week from today, I will be attending Florida's Missing Persons Day in Tallahassee on December 14th. I don't have any big plans or anything. I'm just going to go up there to meet some great people who to this point I only know by talking to them on the phone. I'll be there for the day. Maybe I'll see you there. Where you can find UnFound on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, iTunes, Podomatic, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Podbean, and Overcast. And this week's big announcement, UnFound is now on Spotify, thanks to Podomatic.com. I appreciate my podcast hosting company for doing that for me. The email address, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. The website, unfoundpodcast.com. Please check out the Secret Stephen Kocher episode, now playing there. Amazon.com, Volume 1 in both ebook and print form, $2.99 and $10.99 respectively. Volume 2 coming shortly. On Patreon, you can start contributing to UnFound for as low as $2 a month. UnFound also has a PayPal account. And also, you can go to MakePlayingCards.com where you can find the UnFound First 52 deck. Check that out. Go to that site. Just do a search for UnFound and you'll find them. And please mention UnFound on all true crime Facebook pages and other websites and forums. Thank you. I'm very happy to have back to the show, I think he is our first repeat guest, Anthony from crimeblogger1983.blogspot.com. Anthony, welcome back to the program.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Anthony, you were first with us back in August of 2017 for the Tammy Leopard case, and now you are back to discuss the disappearance of Evelyn Hartley in 1953. What can you tell us about Evelyn?
Evelyn Hartley, she was a 15-year-old junior at Central High School in La Crosse, Wisconsin. She was born November 22nd, 1938 in Texas. She had a younger sister, Carolyn, and two older brothers, Richard and Thomas. Her parents were Dr. Richard T. Hartley and Ethel Hartley. They were from Illinois. Dr. Hartley was a teacher of biology at then La Crosse State College, which is now the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. Evelyn was she was pretty active in like her church and her school programs, but she seemed like a pretty much what you describe as an all-American girl back then. She in school she was involved in drama and the school newspaper, and in church she sang in the choir. And she actually the previous summer she had attended a Presbyterian youth camp. She seemed like a normal 15-year-old girl, even if you think about today's standards. And she didn't have an active boyfriend. She dated a few times, but nothing was serious. She seemed like just nobody really ever had a bad thing to say about Evelyn Hartley.
Just a personable young woman, 15 years old, maybe 9th grade, 10th grade, something like that. And was babysitting, because that plays a part in her disappearance, was that something she often did? I know this might have been the first time with the Rasmussens, but overall, is that a job she had at that time in her life?
She had not babysat for the Rasmussens before. She actually hadn't done any babysitting in 3 months, but from what I read and from what I've interpreted, it's something she did, semi-frequently, enough to where, she would establish a routine of having to call or calling her parents at like 8:30 the night that she babysat to check in with them and stuff. So she hadn't done it in 3 months, and she never did it with the Rasmussens. but it's something she did and she was familiar with, doing so.
Okay. Do you have any idea how the Rasmussens even found out that she was a babysitter in the neighborhood if she'd never babysat for them before? Any idea?
Yeah, her dad, like I said, he was a teacher of biology at La Crosse State University. He was friends with Viggo Rasmussen, who was also a science teacher at La Crosse State University. So they were friends, and that's how he got to where Evelyn was filling in. She wasn't the original babysitter. The original babysitter was a Janice Cowley, but she wanted to attend the homecoming because it was homecoming weekend that week, and she wanted to attend the game. So a week prior, the changes were made to where Evelyn would substitute for Janice.
So it was known a week before this disappearance that Evelyn, instead of Janice, would be at the Rasmussen's house on October 24th, 1953. Like a
Right,
week before. It
correct.
was not a last minute thing, but this had been planned like a week in advance.
Yeah, it was a week in advance, and she agreed to do it. And Evelyn later kind of didn't want to go to do it. She wanted to try to get out of it. I don't know what the reasoning was. Maybe she wanted to attend the game. She didn't really want to do it, but her mother said that she had agreed to do it and she needed to do it. So unfortunately, she went that night.
Okay. Now let's set up let's set it up this way. Who were the Rasmussens, and what kind of neighborhood did they live in?
The Rasmussens were just like any other family. They had two daughters, Rosalind, who was in her teenager. I think she's probably a little bit younger than Evelyn. I think she was around 12, around that age, early teens maybe. And they had a baby who was also named Janice, who was 20 months old. And Viggo Beck Rasmussen, excuse me. He was, like I said, he was a science teacher at La Crosse State University. They obviously, both Dr. Hartley and the Rasmussens, Viggo and his wife Madeline, they all three of them had some good influence on La Crosse State University. There's a leadership award named after Viggo Rasmussen and his wife Madeline.
Even to this day.
Even to this day, yeah.
Wow, that's impressive.
And Richard Hartley retired from La Crosse State College in 1972. And if you go to the page, there's a page that shows the science department. He's listed under, I think it's emeritus status. So he's honored as a doctor still to this day as well for La Crosse State College, which is now the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. So that's how they knew each other.
So they were both the Hartleys and the Rasmussens were accomplished people, educated people. So I'm guessing that they both lived in decent communities, maybe not high-end communities, but decent communities of the early 1950s. Would that be how you portray where the Rasmussens lived, where
the Rasmussens,
Evelyn disappeared from?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry I didn't cover that. The Rasmussens lived at and it's a new addition. It was called the Cooley Addition. It was a new subdivision of houses that was just brought up a couple years prior. There wasn't even paved roads. There was all dirt roads still in the houses. There was no trees in the neighborhood even. Like I've got an overhead shot of the addition, and there's no trees, and you can see that there are dirt roads around. It's all fresh ground. Now, if you go to Google Maps and you look it up, there's foliage everywhere. There's trees blocking and stuff, but then it wasn't. There was not even any street lights, really. So it was really, really brand new addition.
All right, and no street lights might have helped the perpetrators in this crime. We just don't know right at this point.
Yeah, more than likely, yeah.
Yeah, but the houses fairly close together, kind of track houses, kind of the same house right down the street. Maybe people living on like a half acre or something like that.
Correct, yeah. Real close together. Brand new division of houses.
Okay. And you said that the Rasmussens had a daughter that might have been around Evelyn's age. Did Evelyn know this daughter? Did they go to school together or anything like that? Do you know?
Um, from what I understand, they may have known each other. I don't know, I think they were probably acquainted with each other, but they weren't friends or they didn't hang out or anything like that.
Okay. And the reason this daughter didn't babysit her younger daughters because this daughter wanted to go to the homecoming game.
Correct. Yeah, and the 20-month-old they thought was too young to go out. So.
Right. So what happened that day into the night of October 24th, 1953? Evelyn showing up at the Rasmussens. What do we know all these years later? What do we suspect, I
Okay.
should say?
Well, at 6:30, Viggo Rasmussen drove over to the Hartley's home, which was at 1533 Johnson Street, to pick up Evelyn. The houses are not that far away from each other. The Hartleys and the Rasmussens didn't live that far away. It was a little over 1.5 miles away, the houses. So it was a quick drive. He picked her up. They got back to the house shortly thereafter. The Rasmussens leave at 6:45 for the game, and they leave instructions for the baby Janice with Evelyn. They leave at 6:45. She was supposed to cover baby Janice at 7:15. She's supposed to lay her down at 7 o'clock, and then cover her with a blanket at 7:15. Around 7 p.m., Ethel Hartley, which was Evelyn's mom, she described it as a mother's intuition. She felt like she needed to call Evelyn. She just had one of these weird feelings, she said. She felt like she needed a call, but like I said, they had a semi-established routine, a semi-regular thing that when she was out babysitting that she would call at 8:30. So they decided not to call her. And at 8:30, they didn't call. They waited a little bit. So Dr. Hartley started to call the Rasmussen house. He called it twice, and there was no answer. He then started to call the neighbors of the Rasmussens to see if Evelyn had came over to their house by chance. And he called some of the neighbors. They stated that they had not seen her. So at this point, he was kind of understandably alarmed by it, and he told Ethel that he was going to go over to check on his daughter, or their daughter, Evie. She was sometimes called Evie, to check on Evelyn, and he arrived at the Rasmussen home at about 9:20, and he knocked on the door. There was no answer. He then started to do some just walking around the house, and he looked through a window and he saw on the living room floor Evelyn Hartley's her glasses that were broken on the floor, and he also saw one of her shoes on the living room floor. So as he was making his rounds around the house, he noticed that there was a basement window that was open, and there was a screen that was taken out, and it was nearby on the ground. He then proceeded to go into the house. The doors were locked, so he couldn't get in any of the doors. So he goes into the basement window, and
he goes through the basement window.
Yeah, he goes through the basement window. It's dark in the basement. The lights are not turned on. He's familiar. He's been in the house before because he knew where the light was, and he turned the light on. So he proceeds to go up the stairs. At the foot of the stairs is her other shoe. He goes up and into the living room. From what I've read, some of the furniture was disarranged. I don't know how disarranged it was, but they said it was disarranged. Her textbooks were scattered. She had bought about 4 textbooks with her to study that night. They were kind of scattered about. And there was a radio that was playing that was turned on. The reports vary. Some say that it was pretty loud. Others say that you couldn't hear it until you got inside the house. So, but he did go into the bedroom, and baby Janice, thankfully, the baby was still sound asleep in the house, but there was no sign of Evelyn at all.
None.
None.
Um, just a couple maybe points that I want to make about this is maybe a couple curious things. One, about the house. The house had no curtains.
Right.
That might have, if there was a perpetrator in this circumstance, could have looked in the window. Why didn't this house have curtains? Was it that new? What do you know about that?
Yeah, I think it was more. A lot of the houses in the neighborhood didn't have curtains. I guess that was just the way of life back then. Like today, if you drive down a neighborhood, at night especially, maybe not so much during the day, but at night, you're going to see a lot of the curtains closed, and people don't want you looking in and into their house. Understandably, it's privacy. Then that time, it was a much more open, I guess, a society or maybe even a community. People weren't like that. They weren't as um, I guess you say closed off. They didn't mind if you looked in their house. You know, it was kind of more open. It was a more friendly. I guess it could be a more friendly time. I guess you'd say. So I guess it was kind of like it's a reflection of the times, or it could have been that there was a part of it could have been that it was a new neighborhood. But I do remember watching a couple of interviews with people, and they're saying that after this, that the curtains went up and everybody closed their curtains because of this. This had a profound impact on the community. So I think it was more of a reflection of the times.
I bet it did. And something else, uh, Evelyn, for some reason, had brought some flowers over to the Rasmussens.
Yeah.
Is that strange in your mind, or what do you make of that after doing all the investigation that you've done?
Well, that's something I didn't know until just recently. The anniversary was October 24th, and the La Crosse Tribune, a local newspaper, had an interview with Rosalind, who's still alive. Um, and that was the only time that I ever heard. She said that Evelyn had a big bouquet of flowers with her when she came back after Vigo Rasmussen picked her up, and she saw them place the flowers on the table. And but I had not read that anywhere else. So I mean, it maybe it's a detail that nobody really ever got to. But she was also young, and I doubt they interviewed her too. So they mainly stuck with the parents and like the Rasmussens and the Hartleys when they interviewed them. So they probably didn't talk to Rosalind. But yeah, I did not know that until just recently. She does have a Facebook, and I did message her about that. I'm kind of waiting to hear if she would like to talk. But from what I read in the interviews, it's not something she likes to talk about. It shook understandably, both of those families up pretty badly. So.
Right. So we don't know. It seems kind of maybe a little strange that a girl going to babysit somewhere takes a bouquet of flowers with her. That seems a
Hmm.
little strange. We don't know where those flowers came from. We don't know if there was some guy who was trying to impress her, but I'm guessing that her parents have said that they didn't get those flowers for her, and it wouldn't maybe make sense that the Rasmussens gave them to her, so we just don't know.
We don't know, but we also, like I said, you might want to take a look at it from a perspective of it being 1953. It could have just been a gift for homecoming that she wasn't able to attend. So one of her friends may have just given it to her, saying, "Hey, so you can't attend the game, but we're gonna miss you. Here's some flowers." I don't know. It's something that I picked up on, and I was trying to analyze it, but without any more information, there's not a whole lot to go on with that.
Okay. And I think we also have to point out that by the time that Mr. Hartley would have gotten over to the Rasmussens, it had been very dark. You had mentioned that there's no street lights, so he gets out of his car. It's dark in the neighborhood. Maybe there are house lights on inside the Rasmussens, but he'd be walking around the outside of that house. I mean, totally in the dark unless he had a flashlight or something. And very,
Right.
very
Yeah.
dark. Very dark. Okay, but maybe if it was a kidnapping, abduction, whatever happened, it could have still been light out at 7 something in the evening. possible. At that
It's
time,
possible,
October,
yeah.
October of that year, late October, um, depending on when the
Uh,
sun sets.
and I did read that there was a full moon that night as well, so that could
Well,
have helped.
that might help out a little bit. So he gets in. Mr. Hartley gets in through this window that I guess was big enough for an adult male to fit through.
Yeah, 14 inches across, yeah.
So the window was only 14 inches across. That
Correct.
is, I guess Mr. Hartley must have been kind of a skinny guy then. I can't imagine myself fitting through a.
Well, we don't know. I don't have the width
Mm,
of it, but it was 14 inches across at least. So if you imagine the
uh,
width being somewhat, it's manageable. I mean, and that's something that the police scrutinized a lot too, in terms of the evidence they found later on.
So Mr. Hartley figures out very quickly that something's wrong. His daughter's not there, although the baby is fine. The baby's sleeping in the back room, but there's blood near that window. There's the shoes, the books, the glasses are broken. What does he do?
Um, he's a lot of people have scrutinized this. A lot of people online scrutinize his behavior, but he goes across the street, and I think it's easy to say that he's in a state of shock at this point. So he's not thinking very clearly. He just doesn't know what's going on. He went over across the street to a Frank Linder's house, who was a neighbor, and told him what's going on. And Linder, the way he described him, it's easy to say that he was in a state of shock. He couldn't even dial the phone number that for the police station. So Frank Linder dialed it for him, and then he spoke to the police. At the time, the call was logged in at 9:49 that night, and then a couple minutes later, two patrolmen arrived at the residence. They went over briefly. I think it was like a cursory examination of the area, and they were able to ascertain that Evelyn was not in the immediate area. So they called out a detective to come out. The detective came out, and then that's when they started to just do the investigation. There was a search that lasted until 1 a.m. that night, and then it was called off until the next day. They said they secured the crime scene, but as you've discussed in prior episodes, and we've discussed at length, that the evidence gathering isn't like it is today. So
Sure.
So they said they closed off the areas of the crime scene, but later they admitted that they probably didn't do a good job of that, and a lot of the evidence was probably lost in terms of like there were footprints and stuff. They were able to find tracks in the fresh ground out there behind the house and in other houses. So it does look like there was a prowler around that night. In fact, that being a newly developed area, there was fresh ground out. So if somebody was to walk around the neighborhood and stuff, it's really easy to leave tracks in. It looks like there were tracks by a size 11 shoe. And it looks like there were some attempted break-ins of the neighbor houses as well. There were screwdriver pry marks on a couple of the windows of the neighbors' houses, and it doesn't look like he was able to get into those. And there was also pry marks on 3 other windows of the Rasmussen house before the intruder settled on the basement window. And the reason he did that was he was able to take the screen out, and the window that was used for the entrance in the home, it was somehow warped to where it could not be locked. So it was easy to open that window and to be able to get inside the home that way.
Huh, that's weird. A new development and a window is already warped on a building.
Yeah. I don't know exactly. I've read a couple places online, but this is secondhand. This isn't from any kind of news article, but people said it was warped by water. So I can imagine either by snow or something. I don't know exactly how it was warped, but it was warped in a fashion to where it could not be locked.
Okay. The Rasmussens, they're out at the football game while this is all happening. This homecoming game. do they come back, I guess, right into the middle of this? When they get there, the police are already there. They're probably wondering what's going on. Or, and what about their daughter, who was supposed to babysit that night, or the regular babysitter, I should say. Did she have any part in this? Did she come over? What was all happening with the Rasmussens when they came back to see all of this happening at their house?
Well, they came back. I don't know have the exact time. The only time that it mentions this is in that new article from the La Crosse Tribune. Rosalind states that when they came back, there were cop cars everywhere in front of the Rasmussen home, and then um, Mrs. Rasmussen jumped out of the car screaming her baby because she thought something happened to her baby, but the baby was thankfully again unharmed. And then that's pretty much. There's not a whole lot of regarding the time that the Rasmussens got back. I'm assuming that it was after the game or if somebody gave them a heads up and then they came back, but that's pretty much it in regards to that. Rosalind, like I said, she did that recent interview with the Cross Tribune and described it. There was blood located about 10 feet away from the basement window near the Rasmussen home. There was blood left on the side of a neighbor's house at 2311 Cooley Drive, which was the Eugene Downer home. It was left on the side of a garage and also on the side of a window. I guess they called it a window well. It seeped into a window well, so I guess it was kind of like a basement window for that home as well. And there was a good amount of blood left there. So
What do you derive from that? What do you think that means?
I would concur with what law enforcement stated. They believe that Evelyn was placed there. Either she was, fast walked in a manner to where somebody's got her and they're kind of pushing her along, or somebody carried Evelyn and she became kind of heavy and they were trying to get to the vehicle. So they sat her down real quick there and she stayed there for a short time and bled there. Something I forgot to mention was there was some fresh tracks of mud on the living room floor of the Rasmussen home. But oddly, there was no mud in the basement, coming up to the basement or in any of the rooms. The only place there was mud was in the living room, which is something that kind of stood out that law enforcement didn't understand. But there's blood there, and some of the blood that was left on the side of the Downer home, it was a handprint, and it was a suspect handprint. It wasn't Evelyn's. But the handprint had red fibers on it, red fibers, cloth fibers. And Evelyn at the time was wearing some red denim pants that had that kind of thread count to it as well. So it was from her pants, obviously.
How far would you say these blood, the window well with the blood in it and the handprint, how far were they away from the Rasmussen home? 100 feet,
100
50
feet,
feet?
100 so feet away, yeah.
Okay.
All the houses sat close together, so all the investigators thought something different. There was no consensus of this is how it happened. So some of them didn't even think there's not even a consensus on whether or not the prowler, saw Evelyn prior to entering the building. I personally believe that he didn't see Evelyn, but some of them think that a couple of investigators thought that he saw Evelyn in the house and decided that he wanted to take her from that point. I don't think it happened that way. I don't think she was that he saw her. I think she was out of sight at the time, and he came in and it was all. He surprised her. She surprised him, and stuff got out of hand. But for some reason, they hired a criminal investigator months after this, an A.M. Josephson. He was an Army criminologist. He was an expert on the polygraph. Um, he They actually created a new position. He was criminal investigator. He was the only one to ever have that position, and they abolished it about 5 or 6 years later after that. And there's never been another criminal investigator, but he was hired specifically to take on the Evelyn Hartley case. and other jobs, of course. But um, Josephson thinks somehow I don't follow this train of thought, but he thinks that she was trying to escape to the basement window, or at least she was pushed up into the basement window and moved outside. I don't buy that. It doesn't make sense. I've went over the scenarios a lot in my head, and none of them really make sense.
Well, let's try
I
let's
think.
try to set this up for everybody then. Being that we have a lot of information here. So
Mhm,
some guy or guys, or maybe there's a woman with him, we just don't know, is
mhm,
prowling the neighborhood. They're taking a look at some different houses that they're looking to break into. All right, you
mhm.
stated that there were marks on some other windows around the area, but it should be stated we're not sure if those marks were made that night or some other night. There would be no way to tell that probably unless you're looking for it, right?
That's true.
Okay. So they find the Rasmussen house. Maybe they see Evelyn, maybe they don't, or he doesn't. And they find this window, open it up, slide down into the basement, go up the stairs. Evelyn's there. There's a struggle, but we're still not sure. What you're saying is at this point, all these years later, we're still not sure if she was taken out the front door, was taken out the back door, or was taken out the window that the people used or person used to get into the house in the first place. We're still not sure about that.
Correct. Yeah, there's still no definite understanding of how. There's a couple different things about it. Apparently, and I've tried to do some research on it, but I hadn't dedicated a whole lot because there's so many details of this case that you can go down. You can get into all kinds of different rabbit holes
Yeah.
into this case. But apparently, that Rasmussen house had a self-locking front door. So I don't know exactly what that means, but apparently it self-locks. I guess. I guess that's the best way to describe it. So um, they think that at one point law enforcement said that they think it might have been somebody familiar with that type of lock or the home at least because they think that any other person would have had trouble trying to get out the self-locking door.
How far
But
was the basement window above the floor? That window where that was opened. How far was it from the basement floor? I'm guessing it was what 6 feet, 7 feet, something like that. Do you know?
no, it may have been that much. There was a stool that was placed underneath the window. That's something that's very interesting too. I contend, and I happen to believe that it was there like that already. That it was fortuitous that it was underneath that window, and the reason I say that because the window was already warped, and I'm thinking they've never elaborated on the stool placement. I have a picture of it on my blog,
I've seen it. Yeah, I've seen it.
but I think that it was just a happenstance that it was placed under there. Not people aren't really it's not a real popular theory to have it just placed under there. But the window was already warped. I'm thinking maybe it was placed there by happenstance, or somebody tried to repair that window at one point and just left it there. Because when Hartley arrived and crawled through that window, it was still dark in the wind. It was still dark in the basement.
Yeah.
Nobody turned the light on. He turned it on. So unless the person had a flashlight or something, which I guess a prowler might have, I just don't understand. There was one set of tracks, at least from what, according to law enforcement, there was a set of tracks that circled the house. Nobody said there was two sets of tracks. So I just don't understand the placement of if he did place it, there would be no reason to place it underneath the window unless he was trying to make it easy for him to get back out. But if there's nobody in the house, he could probably leave through one of the doors or windows. So I happen to think that it was just placed under there, and nobody else placed it under there. It was placed in there prior, and it was just happened to be there when he crawled through.
Okay. Well, this burglar slash kidnapper certainly got lucky. Of course, in the dark, he wouldn't have been able to see that stool anyway.
Yeah, he
He wouldn't
wouldn't have been
even
able
he
to.
wouldn't he wouldn't have been able to do that. But it's possible, I suppose, that the stool was somewhere else, and then he's looking to leave out the house with Evelyn, and decides the stool. Now he sees the stool maybe,
Hmm.
and puts it over by the window. But it's still, you'd have to be. You'd think it would take more than one person to pull a 15-year-old woman up through a cellar window.
Yeah, and it just doesn't make sense to do it that way. Just to go out. The back door was located just upstairs. A lot of people say that, well, he wanted to do it that way because it's away from the street. Well, the back door is about as far away from the street as you can get, and you can leave out the back door, and it didn't do that either. So I don't think that she was. A lot of the articles online, a lot of the conjecture is that she was drugged down into the basement, and that's why one of her shoes is at the foot of the stairs. Um, and she was lifted up, and another person pulled her out of the basement window. I don't see that
That seems overtly
personally.
complex.
Yeah.
It seems overtly complex, right? Let's try to establish some other things here about that neighborhood for that night. Were any of the neighbors home that night when she was
Yeah.
babysitting? Were most of them home?
A lot of them were actually home. A lot of them were home. Actually, there was a neighbor a couple blocks over that was outside doing some gardening in the nighttime gardening in her yard. That was out. Um, there was the neighbors behind the Rasmussen home. She was doing her dishes. She didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Her view of her from her window where she was doing the dishes looked directly into the back of the Rasmussen house, and she didn't see anything or hear anything. There,
But it would have been dark because
it would
there's
have
no
been
street
dark. Yeah,
lights or anything.
there
Okay.
was a light. The back porch of the Rasmussen home was lighted, so she would be able to see that. But again, she didn't. She didn't see anything. There were some neighbors in the area that they've never came. They've never really been detailed in terms of where they were. None of the immediate neighbors in the area around the house heard anything, but there were some neighbors a couple blocks away or houses down, not in the immediate vicinity, but houses down away from the Rasmussen home that said they heard some screams. One, the one mostly talked about is the Satterbacks, and it wasn't until just last night that they gave their address, and I looked it up on Google Maps, and the address for the Satterbacks is a mile away north of the Rasmussen home. And Elvin Satterback stated that he heard about 2 to 3 screams, with the last one being cut off or muffled in the middle of it. He may have heard screams, but I doubt it was Evelyn. If she did, she had a pair of lungs on her, and nobody else in the immediate area in the houses heard her. And
Not
that's
not to mention that if this person did abduct Evelyn, to carry her a mile or three
yeah,
quarters of a mile or something, once again seems overtly complex.
yeah, and that's something that I took for granted all these years of investigating it. That the Satterbacks probably heard the screams of Evelyn until I actually brought it up, and there's just, like I said, they may have heard screams, but it probably was not Evelyn. There's just, if she screamed that loud and that far away, other people in the immediate area should have heard her too.
Absolutely.
But but like I said, there were other neighbors that said that they heard screams. But this is homecoming night. Parties are going on. It's hard to say, what type of scream it was. That Satterback said that it was a frightened scream. But again, that far away. I mean, the high school that Evelyn went to, Central High School, is located directly in between the house, the Satterback's house, and the Rasmussen house. That's how big of it. It's a mile away, and then there's a big school there and stuff. And
Yeah.
I just don't see that. I don't know how the police believe that may have been Evelyn either. It just doesn't make sense to me.
I doubt it. I doubt it. So, is it your impression then that all of these people are home? I'm not saying all of the people in the neighborhood, but a majority of the people were in the neighborhood were home. But it still seems like this prowler or prowlers were trying to break into these homes, even though all of these other people were also home.
There were a lot of people in the neighborhood that were home, but I'm assuming that the houses. I don't know. I can't speak for what that they were thinking. Obviously, they're not the smartest individual to break into houses and so on. They were looking for something to steal, but I I, I maintain that they may have noticed the Rasmussens leave. And there was no car in the driveway. There's an indoor garage there at that location now, but at the time there wasn't. You had to park the car outside in the driveway. I maintain that they saw no car in the driveway, and they figured that the Rasmussens weren't home, and that's why they because there were pry marks on other windows in the neighborhood, but there were 3 different pry marks on 3 separate windows of the Rasmussen home, and they couldn't get in, so they tried to get into that one. It looks like that one was the one they fixed on. They were fixed on because I believe that there was no car in the driveway, and that's why they did it.
So, and once again, we don't know if you had mentioned there were pry marks and looks like somebody had tried to break into some other houses in the area. But once again, we don't know if that was that night, the night before, a week
Right.
before. We just don't know. Maybe those
Just could
houses
have
were
already been
tried to
there,
be
yeah.
broken into when those people weren't home. We just don't know.
And there was prowlers. There was a prowler that was operating for the better part of the year in that area, and they weren't able to catch him. So it's really likely that those pry marks could have been there prior, like you said, and they didn't notice them until they were looking for them, because obviously, unless you notice something's missing in your home or something's damaged, you're not going to go around looking for pry marks on your house. You're just not going to do it. But if something happens to, like it did with the Rasmussen home, and you start looking for evidence and you find them, you might automatically assume that those were made by the same night.
That's excellent point. Speaking of which, to your knowledge or to anybody's knowledge, was anything taken from the Rasmussen residence besides Evelyn?
Nothing's ever been reported as being taken from the home besides Evelyn.
So we have one or more prowlers who break into a house but don't take anything except the girl, the teenager who was there. Maybe
Correct.
once again, maybe they didn't know she was there and that foiled their plans, but then it's like, well, why would they take her with them or him? We just don't know. It's one of these answers we still don't have over 60 years later. We just don't know.
No, I have my theories on it, but there's no, like, if it was a.
We'll get to the theories at the end. Let's just stick to some of the
Gotcha.
facts at this second. Was the babysitter who was supposed to work at the Rasmussens that night ever questioned?
Yeah, they did it. They did talk to her. They talked to lots of the classmates of Evelyn's, because there was baby Janice, of course. Baby Janice was the one she was babysitting. Evelyn was babysitting, and then Janice Callie was the original babysitter. So there were 2 Janices, but Janice Callie was a classmate of Evelyn's. They interviewed her, and they interviewed lots and lots of classmates, and they seemed to zero in on thinking that it was a student for some reason, or at least they thought that they would be able to find some evidence or make a break in the case by interviewing students. I don't understand that myself. That's something they focused on a lot, and I don't think it was somebody that was a student. I just don't think it was.
Okay. So the next day, the day after, October 25th, 1953, they got volunteers together. Where did they search? How many people were involved? And did the police kind of widen their net of talking to other people? And what can you also tell the listeners about a car being seen in the area? So the volunteer question and the car question.
Around noon, the day of the 25th, the police department issued an announcement on the radio that they were looking for volunteers to help search for the missing babysitter, Evelyn Hartley. So lots of over 1,000 people came out to the neighborhood on Cooley Drive, and they were split up into groups. They searched lots of places. There was Frank Linder, who was the one that Mr. Hartley went across the street to use his phone to call the police. He was involved in searches that was far away up north as French Island, which is about 6 or 7 miles, if I remember correctly, north of La Crosse. So they branched out a lot. They covered a lot of the wooded areas and so on. The search went on for several days up until the 30th. That's when the searches, the big searches, the mass searches stopped, and they started looking into other things, but nothing. Well, there were things that were found, but the car, a couple of the neighbors stated that they saw a light tan-colored sedan driving around the neighborhood. One of the neighbors stated she saw the car circle that neighborhood around 3 times at around 8:30, I believe, that night. It was a light-colored tan car.
in that car? Has it ever been identified? Was there anybody in it? Could this person identify anybody in it? How many people were in it? Anything like that? Had the car ever
No,
been
it
seen
was
since?
no. They didn't get an actual. All they knew was a light-colored sedan. It was tan in color, and the neighbor that witnessed it, stated it was too far away. She didn't see the occupant or occupants in them in
Right,
the car if there was any.
right. And it would have been 8:30 at night. It would have been dark. It would
Hmm.
have been tough to do that. So after that, how many days after people should know that Mr. Hartley he made a public plea,
He
to
did.
anybody who knows anything to come forward, but they also gave him a lie detector test.
Yeah, there were some suspicions thrown in Hartley's direction. I can't imagine what he had to have gone through, but there was some public suspicion on Dr. Hartley, which there's no logic in that. But in order to avoid all of that, he willingly took a lie detector test, and he was passed flying colors. They say it eliminated him. And if you think about it critically, there was just no reason for him to want to harm his daughter, and that's just the worst opportunity to do it. Why would you pick that night? It just none of it would make any sense. It was just, but he wanted to clear it and then get it over with, so he went with the lie detector test, and they cleared him.
Has anybody else, maybe the neighbors, you mentioned this Mr. Linder who lived across the street, even the Rasmussens themselves, do you have any knowledge if any of them or any of the other neighbors had ever taken lie detector tests, were ever given one?
Not to my knowledge, no. They ended up doing mass testing of the schools in the area, but nothing fruitful ever came of that. They wanted to test all the students, but the parents started to object, and it was stopped around 300 after 300 students, and no viable lead ever came from that.
Yeah, let's just talk about that for a second. This is something that would never happen in the 21st century ever
Oh no.
in any community, at least in the United States, that the police actually went to the local high school and started giving lie detector tests to students
Hmm.
about this.
Yeah, they did, and some of the faculty. It was all they focused only on the male students too. That's the interesting thing. They focused only the DA, the District Attorney John Bosshard. It was kind of weird his reasoning. They initially went to the FBI before the testing was done. The lie detector tests were done, and they brought all the information to the FBI. He described it. Bosshard himself described it as this is a sex crime rather than a kidnapping. And he's a DA, and he would know that a sex crime was be a state offense, not a federal offense at the time. So I don't know why he took it to the FBI. The FBI told him, "Hey, we can't help you. We'll help you with some aspects of the case, but we're not going to start an investigation on our own because you said it was a sex crime, not a kidnapping. If it was a kidnapping, the Lindbergh law at the time, they would have intervened. But apparently he thought it was a sex crime, which it could have been both. It could have been classified as both, but um, they didn't end up. They ended up assisting a little bit. They said the labs were open to them and so on, but they did. The FBI didn't start their own investigation. They never did. So, but they did focus on the students during that weekend. It was a Saturday that week. They had a student council convention of students from I think it was the tri-state area, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the surrounding states, in town in La Crosse. So there's a lot of kids in the area at the time. So I think that may have been why they focused in on the students so much. But again, like I said, nothing ever came of that, and that definitely would not have happened today. They also started car checks at gas stations. The gas station attendants were supposed to check cars and to see if there was anything like blood or anything related to anything suspicious. They were supposed to report to the police. So the gas station attendants would, when they came into the cars would come into the gas station attendants would ask if they could go through the cars. And once they did, they found nothing. They put a sticker on the car stating my car is okay. If they did find something suspicious, they would still put the sticker on there, and then they would copy the license plate number down and forward that to the authorities, law enforcement, and then they would follow up on it. But
It's
again,
just a
nothing.
different time in American culture, isn't it?
Yeah, I
That stuff
mean,
would never go on today. That could never
no,
happen.
absolutely not. There'd be a lot of people that would be offended by it. I personally wouldn't be, but there'd be a lot of people that would understandably, I guess, be upset about it.
It just shows how much, I guess, crime fighting has changed in 60 some years as well.
Oh yeah,
And I don't even know of how common this was in the 1950s to put stickers on cars if they've been checked. Did that happen in a case in California or Florida or Maine? I have no idea, but it certainly sounds unique.
it's definitely unique. I've never heard that in the cases I've looked into. I thought it was unique. I mean, it's a good effort, I guess, but I don't know how thorough gas station attendants would be. You know what I mean? Like, how thorough could they be?
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess some of them could be thorough, but I can't say that they're not like they're trained investigators. I don't think it'd be hard to. They're not used to doing that as part of their job. I don't think it'd be hard to get one by them, or say the person's local and they know the gas station attendant and they're friends. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to me. But
Just doing the best they could do with the technology of the time.
right.
No. Let's move on to some of the other particulars. Who is Mr. X, and who is he actually, and what did he say?
Well, 2 days after Evelyn was abducted, they actually only referred to him as Mr. X during the time period, but he was later revealed to be a man named Ed Hoffer, who was a resident of La Crosse. He called the authorities, stating that the night that Evelyn was abducted, he went to his brother-in-law's house, who was a couple houses down, I believe, on the opposite side of the street of the Rasmussen home. Now, since this is a newly developed area, this is something I've tried to look into. They said that it was on 25th Street, which is not far away from Cooley Drive. But I had to take into account that that was a newly developed area. Now, if you go to Google Maps and look up 25th Street, it's nowhere near Cooley Drive. So I'm assuming there were some changes, because the 2300 block, 2311 Cooley Drive, 2300 block would be near 25th Street normally in residential areas. But now it's not. So I don't know which house he was going to, but he drove over to pick up his brother-in-law so they can go either watch the game or go to the game. I'm not sure, but he stated that he noticed, and this is something that's changed a little bit too. Initially, the reports in the newspapers state that when he called the police, he told them that he had saw a man and a woman on the side of the Eugene Downer home, which is where the blood was later found. He said that he saw them, that the female seemed to be in a semi-conscious position, but she was being assisted. Basically, the guy was holding her arm and helping her walk, being assisted. And they were staggering, and he took it as some party goers that got probably a little tipsy early, and they were just partying. So he didn't think much of it. So he went into his brother-in-law's house. He was in there for a couple minutes, maybe three, and he came out. And as he pulled out of the neighborhood and was leaving the area, that either a 1942 or 1941 Series E Buick model car, he almost ran into him. As he was leaving, it was coming directly towards him, and he either swerved or they swerved, and it missed him pretty narrowly. But he saw for a brief second the driver of the car was wearing a baseball hat. He was in the driver's seat, obviously driving the car, and there were two people in the back seat. There was a male in the back seat and a female in the back seat. The female was resting her head on the back of the front passenger seat, and he didn't think much about it. He didn't hear about it until a couple of days later. Then he called him up and told him what he saw. He actually was given a lie detector test, and he passed it. They wanted to know if this story was accurate, if he was making it up. And he passed the lie detector test, although law enforcement would state that they think that he may have used his imagination for some of the details. But I think they kind of put their foot in their mouth, because they went out a couple nights after that and wanted to test him on cars to see how much detail he could really notice. And he got everything right. Like the car would pass him, and he would ask what he was. I guess he knew cars very well because they asked him what kind of car was that and what the color was of it. And he got it every time. So they wanted to recreate something similar, and he nailed it each time. So, but later reports somehow in newspaper reports. I don't know whether this is something that was made a mistake and other newspaper accounts just repeated the same mistake, but somehow, if you read columns later on, they state that there were 2 people with a female on the side of the house and not just one. So I don't know. But if you go back to the police finding evidence of one set of tracks, now I don't know how they may have missed another set of tracks, or I don't know. But there's only one set of tracks around the side that was going around circling the Rasmussen home. So unless another guy got out and started to assist the person trying to get Evelyn to the car. But
Sure.
When they did the investigation, they bought out bloodhounds, and the bloodhounds tracked the scent, they say, from the basement window all the way around to the back side of the house and to the location where Mr. X, Ed Hoffer, saw the 2 people, or the one person with, or Evelyn with 2 people or one person, whichever it was. The scent was tracked up until to the edge of the street, and it was lost. So that's why law enforcement believes she was placed in a car, and that fits with Ed Hoffer. He didn't stay outside long enough to see a car pull up and for them to get in it, but he did see them along the side of the house, and that was the Downer home where there was the bloody handprint on the back of the garage and the window the window well that had blood in it. So.
And so you find him believable? I mean, obviously they found him believable. Do you find him believable all these years later?
Yeah, I do. I do believe that he did see. I do think he's probably the last person to ever see Evelyn alive. I believe his account. And the blood that was in the window well was matched. It had the same type of blood, which A blood is not uncommon. I mean, it's not, not rare by anything. So at the time, the police said that like 45% of the population had type A blood. So, but with the thread count, they did the thread tests with it was red denim thread, and she was wearing red denim jeans. So
let's move on to a couple other things. The shoes and jacket that were found along with the bra and panties. Where were these found? How far away from the Rasmussen home? And can they truly be connected to Evelyn's disappearance?
A couple days after, on the 27th, it was beneath an overpass 2 miles south of the Rasmussen home. Like I said, December 27th of 53. There was a blood-stained pair of panties and a bra was found. They were in an area that was searched prior. Law enforcement believes that they were tossed sometime between Monday evening and at the time that they were discovered, Tuesday at noon. They were discovered around Tuesday of that week at noon on the 27th. They believe that they were thrown from a passing car. There was, like I said, blood was on there. They were able to match. They weren't able to actually determine, because the parents couldn't make a determination on whether that was Evelyn's bra and panties that was her size. And the parents said that was stuff. She did wear things similar. The nailer for me, and I do believe that those were Evelyn's underwear, were apparently Evelyn was menstruating at the time, and the blood that they found on the panties at least was menstrual blood. Okay. And it was type A too, so it's a pretty good possibility that was probably Evelyn's bra and panties.
But like you said, type A blood, fairly common, blood. And the further you get away from the house, the less likely it's going to be her blood. It may be her blood, the type A blood, outside a window, but you get 2 miles away and find type A blood. The odds of it being her greatly decreases.
Well, I mean, it was menstrual blood and it was her size, and the parents said that was stuff that she would wear. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good possibility that hers, but there's no definite answer saying yes, that was hers or not.
Yeah.
So,
How about the shoes and the jacket? Would you say that they are definitely part of this crime, or what?
well, the shoes. Let me get my notes real quick. Where's my notes on the shoes? Shoes were found on the 30th. There's a discrepancy on whether they were found on the 30th of October that year or the 29th. But law enforcement says that they were obviously, again, they were placed there in an area that was previously searched. They were found 2 miles outside of Coon Valley, which was south of La Crosse. I believe it was about 11 miles south of La Crosse, if I remember correctly. Looks like they said they were placed there. They were placed there probably Monday morning on the 26th, excuse me, because this tells you how bad sometimes newspaper reports get. They said they were placed there sometime at 7:30 p.m. Saturday, October 23rd, which can't be the case because the abduction happened on the 24th.
That's right.
So,
Right.
but that was when I started reading that the other day. I'm like, that can't be right. But that's what the newspaper stated. But I guess they were looking for Evelyn before she disappeared. I guess I don't know. But they were size 11 shoes, the same as the prints that were left around the house in the neighborhood. They had a distinctive suction cup tread on the bottom of them, which was matched. There was what the clincher is for me with that is that the shoes were by spectrographic analysis determined to have been in the Rasmussen home. And when I got into that farther, it says dirt clods from the shoes were found on the premises, and the particles from them contained a metallic magnetic substance of the same type gleaned from sweepings taken from the home. So I guess in layman's terms, I guess the same type of material they swept up for as evidence at the Rasmussen home. They had the same type of metal fragments or metallic magnetic substance that was on the shoes as well. It was discovered on 2 miles outside of Coon Valley. So that's how they were able to link the shoes with the same type of suction cut pattern underneath the shoes. And I guess from the substances they used as evidence that they gathered. So I guess they called it spectrographic analysis, but they were able to determine that the shoes were at the crime scene. And they were in an area previously searched, like I said. So.
And what about the jacket?
The jacket's interesting. The jacket's very interesting. There's not a whole. I've got pictures of it on my blog, but there's no definite time in which. Apparently, a driver of a farm grader was driving along Highway 14, which is the highway that the shoes were found, and the shoes would have been some 800 feet away from the jacket, and it was on the same side. It looks like they don't ever give you specifics on how the shoes were found. They said they were found inside of a ditch along the side of the road. Other times you read it, they say they were placed there. So I don't know whether they were thrown from a moving car or if somebody went down there and just placed them down there. I don't know. But the jacket was found by a driver of a farm grader. He saw the jacket along the highway in a ditch on the east side, the same side of the road that the shoes were found on. And he kept it. Couple reports say that he kept it for about a week and then turned it in. Other reports state that the police followed up on a rumor and found the jacket in the possession of a farmer and acquired the jacket on November 17th. Very weird. I don't know which one to take for granted. I don't know if either of them are true, but there seems to be a discrepancy on that. And the interesting thing is, when they acquired the jacket, they didn't seem to question the farmer that drove the grader that found it. So they never did question him. He just handed him the jacket, and that was it.
The jacket had blood on it, didn't it?
Yeah, the jacket did have blood on it. The bloodstains were on the front of the jacket, and there were some on the back of the jacket. Apparently, they determined that the blood that was on the jacket was not from the wearer. I don't know how they determined that, but that's what was reported. So I guess they looked at the jacket. It was a used jacket. It was fairly well worn. There were metal paint flecks on it. It had been cut off at the bottom and rehemmed in white thread. The one of four of the buttons were missing. There was a wear mark running the entire width of the jacket under the armpits. They speculated that it might have been possibly from a safety harness. There were bast fibers in the jacket, in the left pocket, and on one of the left pockets in the jacket. The bast fibers were like the kind used in scrubbing brushes. They did a lot of tests on the jacket, but at one point, the criminal investigator Josephson stated that he thought of the steeple jack, which would use the same type of kind of harness that the wear marks would show on the jacket, might have been involved. I think that the scientific testing they did was good, but I wouldn't have relied on it so much because you never know if the jacket was secondhand or not. You know, that stuff could have been on the jacket, and somebody could have found the jacket and given it to somebody. They also thought that the size of the jacket, size 36 jacket, was too small to have been worn by a person that wore size 11 shoes. And I don't like that either.
Yeah.
The jacket was cut off at the bottom. That could have meant, I mean, it was size 36. I don't know if they said it was size 36 after it was cut off and rehemmed, or if it was originally a size 36. But that could have been, you know, a larger jacket, and they could have cut off the bottom for whatever work that the person that wore that couldn't have a loose fitting jacket at their profession. They couldn't have it be loose like that, and they cut it off to make it shorter. I don't know, but there was a lot of scrutiny on the jacket. Like I said, he thought a steeplejack was involved, but if you read into articles, he also stated, I don't think the wear marks were as visible as a lot of the newspaper accounts made it sound, because he said that he only noticed the wear marks that was under a certain light at a certain angle. So I don't think they were as prominent as many of their news reports would have you think they were. Like I said, he said he only noticed them under a certain light at a certain angle. Did he notice those wear marks?
So can we 100% connect that jacket to Evelyn's disappearance? Likewise with the shoes and these other items. What would you say your percentage of certainty that they could be connected to Evelyn's disappearance?
They said the shoes and the jacket were by spectrographic analysis. I don't know how they did the spectrographic analysis on the jacket. I do know the jacket did fall out of favor as time went on with some of the investigators. They didn't know if it was there, but I'd say it's probably a good 50-50 chance that it was there. I'm more with the scientific analysis they did on the shoes and with it matching the prints around the house. I'd say the shoes are definite. I don't know about the jacket, to be honest with you. It's up in the air with me.
And the bra and panties, though, you're fairly certain those were Evelyn's.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. They were discovered 3 days afterwards. And all this stuff, I mean...
were they all found in the same area?
No, the bra and panties were found 1 mile, 2 miles south of the Rasmussen home. And then it was 11 miles outside of the city, 800 feet apart, where the shoes and the jacket was supposedly found 800 feet away from the shoes. So
nowhere near each other they were found. Nowhere near each other.
Well, the shoes and the jacket semi in the same area, but not the bra and panties. No. Yep.
Let's move on to this. The Whizzer motorbike. Maybe you should first explain what a Whizzer motorbike is, and then is that somehow connected to this disappearance as well?
They said some of the wear marks underneath one of the shoes would indicate that the person that wore the shoes operated a Whizzer motorbike. A Whizzer motorbike is basically a bicycle with a motor on it. Basically, you kind of think of like an antiquated moped, a lot slower, I guess you'd say. I got pictures of it on my blog, but it's just a bicycle with a motor on it. Because a lot of the pedals, like I think you can probably match that kind of a wear pattern up with any kind of machinery, like even a farm grader. Like I did some research on that, and the farm grader had the gas pedal on the same side that a Whizzer motorbike would have on it. and the pedal looked had it made a distinctive mark too. So I don't know, unless they knew more. They probably knew more than I did, but I wouldn't have. I guess they went in and investigated a lot of the Wizard motorbike owners, but no good lead ever came of that. So I think you could say that the wear pattern on the shoe and the bottom of the shoe could come with any kind of machinery pedal, I guess you'd say. I mean, I guess it could be matched to a lot of different ones. I don't know why they focus on a Wizard motorbike, but they seem to.
Okay. Let's go to some suspects now. We're just going to keep it to a couple because there were extensive list of people that they looked at. Some more probable than others, but we're just going to stick to a few of them. And what would probably be the most prominent ones. What can you tell listeners about Hayward Teague, and why did they look at him?
Hayward Teague, he was a 19-year-old African-American kid from the Chicago, Illinois area. The car that he was driving seemed to match descriptions of the tan-colored car that was seen in the neighborhood. Inside one of the shoes that they found, they said they had found an African-American hair. I don't know how good the testing was back then. I do know that years and years afterwards, they kept comparing the handprint on the side of the Eugene Downer home with African American suspects that committed similar crimes. Hayward Teague was driving a stolen, what they said was a stolen car from Illinois, and they had stopped him. And there was a couple days prior in Madison, Wisconsin, there was a couple assaults on newly developed houses in a newly developed area in Madison. In fact, one of the suspects entered in through a basement window, and he attacked a housewife there and hit her with a slapjack. I guess a slapjack is kind of like an improvised
short club.
Short club. There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I guess he had clubbed one housewife with one, and she had yelled out for her son. And I guess the suspect thought that her husband may have been home, so he fled. There was a couple of attacks on housewives in Madison. One of the wives that were attacked actually picked out Teague from a line of suspects and said that was the person that did it. So they kind of zeroed in on Teague as possibly been involved in the Hartley abduction. He was given a lie detector test, and he actually passed it, stating that he didn't do anything, had nothing to do with the Madison attacks. I heard up to maybe one or two of the victims in the Madison, Wisconsin attacks had picked him up out of a lineup, but he seemed to have passed the lie detector test. The car that was supposedly stolen, he did get charged with the stolen vehicle, but it was I think it was pled down to a lesser charge because the car was actually either a relative or a friend, and he said that the person let him borrow it. So I don't know the real big story behind all of that, but he did plead to something that was a lesser charge. But they did look into his prints, and they did look into him as a suspect in the Hartley abduction, but to my knowledge, nothing ever came of this.
Could he have been in the area of La Crosse, Wisconsin on that night?
Yeah, because he drove. I guess he drove through into Minnesota at one point. So they wanted to see if he was in the area. I guess he denied being in the area. So it's possible that he was in the area at the time, but there's no proof that he was or that he had anything to do with the Hartley abduction.
Okay. And did they try to match his hand to that handprint, the bloody handprint on the other house?
They did look into the prints, but I'm assuming since he was never charged or arrested that nothing ever came of that. But I'm not sure how good the bloody palm print. It was just a bloody palm print. I don't think there was any fingerprints on it. It was just a palm print. So I don't know how well they could have matched it.
Okay. And I'm guessing that he never intimated to anybody that he might have had something to do with Evelyn's disappearance in any way? Never confessed to, a friend, girlfriend, a
No,
cellmate, anything like that?
no, he just seemed like a guy that was just kind of like a delinquent. I ended up um, getting a hold of a background check on Teague just last night, and he was arrested a few times later on in his life up until 1984. It was like he relocated to Miami, Florida, and he was still breaking into houses in 1984, but nothing that I saw in his record. It was like one resisting arrest, but it was done non-violently, I guess. I don't know how I guess he was resisting arrest, resisting an officer, but he wasn't doing it violently. But there's nothing violent in his background that would lead me to believe that he had done something like that before, or he did anything since.
And just to be clear, he was never charged with those other break-ins either.
No, he wasn't.
Even though he was identified.
Even though he's identified and he passed the lie detector test, and the person that was investigating, the local law enforcement, didn't believe that he was involved, but they said they didn't count him out. So I guess they said that, they had no evidence stating that he did, and that he probably didn't, based on their investigation.
Who is John Watson?
John Joseph Watson. He was a pretty bad guy. He at one time he'd lived in Madison, Wisconsin as well. He was just an all-around bad guy. He was convicted he was almost convicted in 1959 of killing Edna Mausch, Minnesota wife that he had ended up beating to death. He broke into her house and murdered her, and he was arrested for it. And for some reason, I never understood it. Years later, the DA in the case dropped all charges in the Mausch slaying and didn't charge him with it. It would only come back to haunt him years later in 2003, where they were able to actually match DNA from the Edna Mausch slaying to John Watson. And then in 2003, they followed up on charging, and he was convicted of that. He was already serving a life sentence on a couple other things. He had kidnapped 3 college girls, I believe in Minnesota.
In what year?
Sometime in the 70s. I want to say 73, but it was in the 70s somewhere. And he raped them, but I don't think he killed them. I think they all got away. None of them were killed, thankfully, but they caught up with him, and he was charged with that. He also attacked 2 women with a hammer and killed one of them, and the other one survived, fortunately. And he was serving a life sentence for that when the charges with the Mausch slaying were brought back up. Part of it was he was bragging that he did kill Edna Mausch to a jailhouse person, and he bragged about it. And that's part of the reason they caught him, because back in 1959, like I said, the evidence wasn't really well taken care of, so they couldn't prove that he was there. But he ended up telling on himself to a jailhouse buddy. But like I said, charges were dropped, and it wasn't until 2002 that he was recharged. He passed away in 2004, but his prints were also compared to the palm print as well. But nothing ever came of it either.
Was John Watson looked at right away regarding Evelyn's disappearance, or did it take that case in 1959 for them to take a look at him?
He was looked at maybe a year or two afterwards, and I think they were trying to. I think he might have been the person responsible for the Madison attacks, because when I did background research on him, I noticed that he also lived in Madison at the time. So that's kind of convenient. I don't know why the housewives would have picked out Teague, because I don't know. I've got pictures of both of them on my blog. They don't look alike, unless there's years between the pictures. But to me, they don't look alike a lot alike at all. But I think he may have been responsible for the Madison attacks. But it's never been conclusively proven who was responsible for the Madison attacks.
And I'm guessing that his palm print didn't quite match the bloody print for either size reasons or whatever. So that's the reason he was never charged in Evelyn's disappearance.
Correct. I'm sorry. The other thing that makes me believe that it wasn't Watson was he did all of his stuff alone. He did it by himself. And from what it sounds like with Evelyn's, there were at least two people involved. So
Let's talk about one more possible suspect, but it's not so much a suspect, but a recording that was made. What can you tell the listeners about that?
yeah, in 2004, a local bar owner in Wisconsin came forward with a tape that he had made in 1973 of a guy that he was recording. He was just recording because he said he thought he was a funny guy. He was a local character in the area, and the guy started talking about Evelyn Hartley case, and the guy's name was Whitey Barkley, and he was an older guy. He was just talking about how him and his buddy, he thinks his buddy Jack Galtair, his name was Jack Galtair, was involved in the Hartley abduction. And he stated that I got part of the transcript on my blog, but it's just him talking about how Galtair was involved in Hartley's abduction, and it's interesting, but a lot of people have really dug into the tape. But to me, it just sounds like a guy that maybe had a few drinks and just telling a tall tale. Give you some perspective on it. They investigated a suspect after Evelyn's abduction, and it was a guy that was saying that he knew where Evelyn's body was, and he was a guy that came into a bar all the time. And they investigated him and found out that he was just telling tall tales. He was just a loudmouth drunk. And this is what kind of reminds me of Barkley's talking, and he's talking about how Galtair went out and knew Evelyn was going to babysit in advance, and he got a hold of her, and they took her, and I guess they took her to a farm in Lafarge, Wisconsin, and murdered her and stuff like that. Part of the transcript has been released, and it's on my blog. It's real brief, but I didn't put a whole lot of weight on it. The only thing that I thought was somewhat interesting that about it is Jack Galtair, who since he actually ended up committing suicide several years after Evelyn's abduction, but he was convicted the year prior to Evelyn's abduction to contributing to the delinquency of a minor, and it was also a 15-year-old girl. Apparently, he was getting her drunk, and I guess he tried to take advantage of her at one of the houses he was staying at, and he later got charged with it. But
was this in the area of where Evelyn disappeared?
It was in Wisconsin. I don't know if it was in the area that she disappeared in. It wasn't in La Crosse, no, but it was in. It wasn't far away. It was one of the towns, Viroqua, which is I believe up north, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong, but yeah. So that the guy came forward with the recording in 2004 because he said he had forgotten about it, which I think is kind of weird.
And when was the recording actually made?
1973.
So he held on to it for 31 years.
Yeah, 73, 74. It was around the 30th anniversary when this was released, which I found kind of suspicious. So a lot of people have really tried to dig into that, and Galtair was convicted of contributing to the delinquency of a minor, and it was a 15-year-old girl, so they tried to make connections there, but the police did follow up on it. They did go to a house that supposedly Jack Galtair had lived in, and they went to the location even 30 years later and talked to the person that owned the house. And they said, "Can we have a look around? We're investigating a 30-year-old murder." And they looked around and stuff, but they said they did follow up on it, but nothing really ever came of it. There's been leads that they followed up on, like in 1989 in Pickwick, Minnesota. They followed up on a lead that was actually related to Galtair as well. And in some way, he was one of his friends. I believe it was the guy they may have interviewed. It may have been Barkley. I could be wrong, but one of his people that he knew owned some land out in Pickwick, Minnesota. They thought that maybe they got a tip that a car and a body had been buried out there a long time ago, and they went out there and dug for a better part of a day, and they didn't come up with anything. And they said that they don't believe that the Pickwick, Minnesota tip had anything to do with Evelyn Hartley. So,
Were any of the neighbors investigated? Just to finish this section up of suspects, were any of the neighbors investigated at all?
Depends which newspaper you read. I don't think they were investigated. They were talked to. Um, some, the Chicago Tribune won an award for their coverage of the Hartley case, which I find incredibly crazy. But I don't think they did a real good job in terms of covering it, because they posted a couple articles, like with Mr. X. They stated that he had seen the same car that he saw that night in the area, and that he seen the driver and recognized the driver. But he stated he never told them that. But if you read some of the newspapers, like the Chicago Tribune, they stated that some of the neighbors hadn't been talked to, but other reports from locally said that they did investigate and talk to all the neighbors. So it depends on where you go. I wouldn't put too much credence on the Chicago Tribune reports. Some of them are good, but not all of them. They're trying to sensationalize the whole thing. But I don't think they were ever investigated. They may have been, but they were definitely talked to.
So we have this very complex case, to the point where we're not even sure how Evelyn left the house. We're not sure if she went out the front door, the back door, the window in the cellar. We have the blood evidence. We have a palm print. We have the sighting of a car. We have this Mr. X guy whose sighting seems to be pretty credible. We have a couple suspects who, in general, would seem like good suspects, but still, this case is still unsolved 64 years later. It doesn't seem like it's any closer to being solved. So, what's your best guess at this point? You've devoted a lot of time and a lot of space on your blog on this particular case, as much as any case I think you've covered on there, maybe except for maybe Tammy Leppert's case. What's your best guess at this point, Anthony?
Not
so far as a suspect, as far as what actually happened that night.
I believe that it was a break-in gone bad. I'd put money on it. It was a break-in gone bad. I don't believe they saw Evelyn prior to breaking in. I think that they surprised each other. I think they were local to the area. I think they may have even been involved in the search, possibly. Now, I don't have any reason to believe that. That's just a hunch on that part. But that there was, I take it from taking it from the reason that there was a prowler that was in the area for the better part of a year. In that area. They weren't able to catch him. He was coming back, and they even had issues with prowlers afterwards. I believe if I haven't, I'll put it up after we have this conversation, but I do have articles a couple of years afterward that still show that there was a prowler in the area, and they were still having problems, and I don't believe they ever caught him. I believe that she could have recognized, it was a small town at the time, around 40,000 people. So I believe that they were local to the area, and that was possibly the reason she was taken. I believe the evidence was planted in terms of everything was placed there after either the search parties missed it, that they were looking for the evidence. They missed the boots, the jacket, and the brawn panties. I happen to believe that they were planted to mislead, to make it look like they were going outside of town when they really weren't. That's my best guess. I don't think any of the suspects that they've looked into or mentioned, any of them were good suspects.
Not Hayward Teague, not John Watson, not the guys mentioned on the tape. You happen to believe that this crime was perpetrated by somebody a little closer to the community than somebody outside the community.
Yeah, I do. And I don't think that the person was experiencing this type of crime, and I think it got out of hand. I believe there was a shag rug that was on the living room floor that they said that there were drag marks on it. I believe she may have heard something going on downstairs, and he may have been coming up the stairs as she went to investigate, and he either grabbed her or she lost one of her shoes, and they ran into the living room, and there was a struggle. and I think he incapacitated her, and he drug her somewhere to the side or whatnot. Um, some of the evidence is so misleading. I think she went out the front door. I think she probably ran out the front door to get away, and he caught up with her. And then a struggle ensued about 10 feet from the window. He may have even hit her with that screen to incapacitate her. But I think she was semi-conscious when he was leading her out of the neighborhood. I think it just got out of hand. I think there was another person in a car off Cooley Drive that was basically the watchout. I think this guy was the burglar / vandal, whatever you want to say. And he was burglarizing houses. I think that was the lookout car, like you would with a bank robbery. You have somebody outside the bank ready to drive off. And I think that it got out of hand, and he decided that he had to. She was already outside. I'm not sure if the screams happened or not. I don't know. I don't think the Satterbacks heard her scream, though. That doesn't make any sense to me. But I think that it got out of hand, and he didn't know what to do. And I don't think he was experiencing it. And I think it was somebody very local. And I don't think they probably ever did it again. But none of the suspects looked good from what I looked at. And Lacrosse had a high percentage of they called them sexual deviants then, but sexual predators now, I guess they call them, in the area then. So there was a good amount of them around that area, higher per capita than anywhere else in Wisconsin. So,
but you still reject the idea that this perpetrator was going after Evelyn, might have been prowling the area, saw her inside, and wanted to take her. You're still under the belief that this was a crime of wanting to steal stuff, not a person.
Yeah, because if it was a sexual crime, he could have done it right there and left. He didn't have to take her.
Was there anything, to your knowledge, was there anything in the house of the Rasmussens worth taking?
No,
I mean, besides the regular stuff like jewelry. I mean, I guess we forget that, it's 1953. You can't carry a TV back then. They're too big. Americans, at least these days, have so much more expensive possessions than they did back then. We have computers, we have cell phones, we have iPads, we have all this stuff that's within our house. Back then, not as much. So are you thinking this might have been something along the lines of wanting to steal Mrs. Rasmussen's jewelry or something?
Probably. I mean, there was house burglaries still back then, and money and jewelry have been stolen all through time. So, yeah, it's probably something. I mean, it has to be something. I mean, I imagine. I don't know if there was anything in the house that was worth stealing. I imagine there was, or they wouldn't be breaking into it. But I don't know what would have been a target. But I do think it was a burglary motive, and it got out of hand.
And you also reject the idea that this might have been a case of mistaken identity, where this person who broke into the house thought the other babysitter was there instead, and she was the target. And then this guy or men got into this house and figured out, the girl that we thought is here is not here. You totally reject that.
I don't totally reject it. I just don't find it. I mean, I'll be open to anything, but at this time, I don't think that would be the case. No. Mistaken identity. She did this a week in advance, and I'm sure since the original babysitter told everybody that she's going to be at the game, I don't think a case of mistaken identity would have worked. It didn't. I don't believe it was students either. Like, they focused in on the students. I don't believe it was. I really believe it was somebody local to the area, and I don't believe they were students. I really don't.
An adult, not a teenager.
Right.
Okay. What's the status of this case right now? Would you call this a cold case? Completely cold?
Oh, yeah. It's really cold. I don't think law enforcement did some odd things. Like, I have a 4-part special on my blog with Steve Bothun, who was a TV reporter out of Wisconsin. He's since passed away, unfortunately. I've spoken to his son, but he did an investigative 4 or 5 part, I forget, on my 4 or 5 part special on my blog. He stated Lacrosse really got sloppy in some of the aspects. I don't think they know where the jacket and the shoes are anymore, because in that special 1989, he states that Lacrosse police department said they don't have it. They sent it to the state crime lab. The crime lab said that they never received it. They don't have it. So it's definitely a cold case because they don't even know where the evidence is anymore. So I think if they come up with a lead, they'll like they did with the tape, that they'll look into it. But I don't think that it's something they're actively pursuing. Definitely a cold case.
So the only way it's going to get solved is if somebody just walks right into their police department and says, "Yeah, I did it," or "I have proof of who did it."
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah,
Really?
and odds are, I mean, Evelyn would be 80 years old, 81 or something. So odds are whoever did it's probably long since passed away. Her one of her older brothers passed away just last year, Thomas Hartley. The other brother, the oldest brother, um, um, he died of polio in the Navy in 1940. It's either 46 or 50. I get two different accounts, but the only one left now is her sister, her younger sister, who was 6 years old at the time, Carolyn. So, yeah, and the Hartley family got kind of lost faith in it after a while. After a couple of years, they said they didn't want to read about it anymore, and I can't blame them.
Did the Rasmussens continue to live in that house after that happened?
No, they didn't. They sold it months afterwards. From what I understand, they wanted to get away from it. And the new house that they moved to, they made sure that they had bars in the basement windows. I mean, it really affected both families and really the community, but the two families involved, it really, really affected them big time.
Why don't you, Anthony, why don't you give everyone, the listeners, the address to your website, the good work you're doing there, and maybe mention a couple of the other cases that you've been writing about recently as well.
The website is crimeblogger1983.blogspot.com. You can also contact me if you want me to blog about a case at crimeblogger1983@gmail.com. I just got done blogging about a case of Parker Eastman. Contacted his family, and thankfully he was found safe a couple of days ago. That was a recent case we did. One of the cases I'll be doing in the near future is the case that actually got me started on Evelyn's case, ironically. It's Joan Risch, and I'll be doing a pretty lengthy blog entry on her coming pretty soon. I'm still on Evelyn's because there's so much case information that I'm having to continuously update. I spent the better part of 2 years on Evelyn. I probably spent about 3 years on Joan Risch. But some of the other cases I've blogged about, of course, Tammy's case, and that's pretty much those three cases are pretty much the most prominent ones. I did one on Lee Ochi recently, Lee Marine Ochi. I spoke to her dad, even did an interview with her father. So
I guess I also have to, at this point, being that you're on the program again, I have to thank you for introducing me to Deanna Riley, who was a guest regarding the disappearance of her sister or her mother, Lucinda, in the Tampa Bay area back in 1984. The listeners don't know Anthony is the one who put me in contact with Deanna. So I need to thank you for that. So you've also have that case on your blog as well. So any last words before we conclude this interview?
No, I'm really thankful that I was able to come on and talk about Evie's case. There's not a whole lot of information on it, and you've mentioned in all the cases that she's one that seems to be forgotten in a lot of the missing person cases. So it's one that I spent a lot of research on, and there's still some things that we covered the broad aspects here, all the basics. There's still some other things that they might want to check out in terms of them possibly thinking they found the car in Minnesota and so on that they might want to check out. There's a lot of other details that you might want to check out if you're interested in the case that are on the blog, and I'm continually updating that entry. So, but I'm real honored to be on this show for your first reoccurring guest. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
You're welcome. The blog is crimeblogger1983.blogspot.com, and Anthony, I thank you for being on this episode of UnFound.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And that was my interview with Anthony from crimeblogger1983.blogspot.com. He's doing nice work over there regarding Evelyn's case and many others. One point we left out regarding Evelyn's disappearance: the serial killer Ed Gein was also looked at as being a suspect. But like the other men, there was no hard proof either way. Regarding the interview, here are some points that stuck out to me. Evelyn's footprints weren't found anywhere on the outside of the house. Was she carried? If so, that would contradict the eyewitness who said she was walking. And if this witness got something like that wrong, what does it mean? Evelyn's shoes. I don't think they came off while trying to get away. I bet she used them as weapons, throwing them at whoever entered the house. And that's the reason they were in two different locations. Evelyn being taken away. That's something that confuses me, because this doesn't appear to be a break-in that turned into something more. Unless... I don't do a lot of theorizing on the actual podcast of UnFound. I do most of it over at the Patreon blog. But I want all of you to hear this, and I want to hear what you think of it. This line of thinking would certainly fall under the shadow of coincidence category, although I typically don't like coincidences in crimes. Say the burglar knew that the regular babysitter wasn't working the Rasmussen house that night. He found out that she was going to the homecoming game. He also hears that the Rasmussens are going to the homecoming game. So putting those two facts together, the burglar thinks that the Rasmussens are taking their 20-month-old baby to the game as well. Why? Because the babysitter will be at the game. Thus, the Rasmussen house will be empty. The burglar gets to the house. Yes, he sees the lights on, but doesn't think anything of it. It could be the Rasmussens left the lights on to scare away guys like himself. Burglar goes to the window, pries it open, gets inside, and then there's Evelyn on the stairs. At that point, he has to take her with him when he escapes. Why? Because the only way a guy would know that the regular babysitter was at the game and that the Rasmussens were going to the game would be someone from the area as well, somebody from the neighborhood. Someone who was close enough to both the regular babysitter and the Rasmussens to know this information. And probably also somebody that knew Evelyn Hartley as well. And at that point, the burglar knew that he had to take her with him when he escaped because she would be able to identify him. What he didn't know was that the Rasmussens made other arrangements for that night, screwing up this burglar's plans. But I'll leave the rest of the theorizing up to you. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to UnFound and give this podcast a 5-star review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've been listening to UnFound.